Welcome to the Brightwell Podcast. My name is Tony Capucille, and I'm again here with Trey Raymer, my partner CFO, as the guest on the podcast. Welcome, Trey.
Great to be here. Thanks so much. I'm really passionate about this topic and excited to be discussing it with you. You know, facts are stubborn things, and when the data and the experts that are paid to study it are all kind of screaming the same thing, you should probably listen to them.
Well, you jump right in. I like it. And I think it's because we missed Trey for a podcast. We had Nate Bauer talking with us about orgs. I know you could have talked about orgs as well.
Oh, Nate's the man. Glad he's
Nate's
here.
the man. He's the man. That being said, we're going to jump in. This is an interesting angle. Obviously, Brightwell is in the energy business. And a lot of times people don't think about that. They think about solar as a partisan thing or something off to the side, but it's smack dab in the middle of the energy sector, which, I mean, your background really came from oil and gas. So you're very familiar with energy and from Oklahoma.
Yeah,
I mean,
my whole 20-plus year career prior to getting out here is all energy, largely oil and gas,
Which it's interesting. Energy is just always something that we need. And I think whenever you left to go from oil and gas to solar, it probably didn't feel like quite as big of a leap, even though it's a different technology than a lot of people might think.
Yeah, to me, it's all just energy, just different forms.
Yeah. And like fundamentally, when we look at energy, it's funny. You and I have had the chance to talk with different people in the political spectrum, business landscape, homeowners. It affects all of us. Like, no one's immune. Nonprofits. No one says I'm going to take off from using energy. So anytime you can get into this space, I'm talking like just macro level,
Sure,
and solve it in a different way or in a way that can maybe you can see a better path through. That's kind of why we got into the renewable space. And Brightwell's we're not necessarily solar or bust.
No,
all of the above has kind of been our thesis, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that today.
yeah, that's what our country needs.
Yeah, so we need energy, no matter what side of the political spectrum. We're not political anyways, but you have to have energy. And so today's podcast is going to talk a little bit less about the particular Brightwell transaction, be it a solar or a geo or a project. We're just going to talk about energy and what's going on in this space. Because I think whenever you neutralize, as you said, facts are stubborn things. If you just look at the facts and just look at the space, there's a really interesting story unfolding for us. So why don't you kind of just give us a little bit of context for what's going on in the country and why we should all be paying attention to the macro trends?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, energy prices across the country are just exploding. They just are. So it really kind of leads to two questions. First of all, why is that happening? And secondly, is this just the tip of the iceberg? So you kind of have to attack both those questions separately. So the first, why is this happening?
Well, real quick.
Yeah.
I want you to go into why, but how much are they going up? Like perspective-wise, because I don't think people always know, because it might seem small whenever you're not paying attention month to month, year to year. So some people it's become a really big deal. But why? How much has it been going up, Trey?
It varies by state, varies by location, but largely 7 to 10% across the country.
Which is compared to historical rates.
Yes, historical rates been around 3-ish% around that range.
So we're right now across the country. And we're in Oklahoma. Everyone thinks Oklahoma's low energy prices forever. And we're a great state to kind of normalize this with because we're not immune to it. This is happening in New Jersey. This is happening in California. And this is happening in Oklahoma. So when you're talking about double the increase, you're talking across the whole country.
Across the whole country, and people are feeling it in dramatic ways. I mean, we're not going to get into politics here, but we've seen races that have happened just in the past few months where that has been a primary issue. Electrical price increases. Governor Virginia, Governor of New Jersey, both ran heavily on this issue and won. And for the first time in the last 20 years, utility board in Georgia actually elected a couple of Democrats who were focused on this issue. And people are resonating with it because they feel it in their pocket. You cannot BS someone about their utility bill.
Yeah, you can't. And they have to pay it. They can't turn that off. They can't say we're not going to eat out this month. And even businesses, nonprofits, they all feel that. And by the way, it doesn't matter who won or lost those races or those boards. What we're saying, it was a central ticket item. That's key. So it's rising above all of the possible topics that can weigh on people's minds to elect a governor, to elect a utility board leader. These things are going to matter in a significant way. So, all right, now that's kind of how. But let's talk about why. Why might this just be the tip of the iceberg?
Yeah, so I kind of analogize it to just the perfect storm, which I know there was a movie on that years back. I haven't seen it in 10 years or whatever. But the thesis was effectively you had these three different forces that were converging that effectively led to a once in a generation type storm. And we've got kind of the same type of thing happening here. So kind of what are those different stools, if you will, that are hitting here? The first is just an outdated power grid with lack of investment. So you kind of let's put some historical perspective on how that happened. So if you look back to the beginning of this century, and if you're just listening to me and not watching, you're not going to be able to see what I'm doing here. But really from the start of the century, consumption has been relatively flat up until the last few years. And that's important because if you're a utility owner and you're having to make long-term capital decisions, you're going to be looking at what's my forecast telling me is going to happen. So those forecasts, and you can actually see them because they have to provide their forecast to the FERC. So they were not anticipating much other than the status quo for a long period of time, and that held true until it didn't recently. And so when you think about that, there was actually recently a Senator Energy Committee Chairman Mike Lee was in a committee, and he was giving an analogy around it. He said, this is as if you have a 2-lane highway that was built 20 years ago, and now suddenly you have just a massive increase in cars and big trucks that are on that. Everything is changing around the highway except for the highway. And when that happens, then you've got an issue with the highway.
You do. That's a great example that the senator gave because obviously, when you're on your way to work and you feel that congestion and you start slowing down and wrecks and timing increases, you feel it, you see it, you get frustrated about it, you talk to your friends about it. But energy feels different because you don't get to see the highway quite as much, right? I mean, it's a pretty distinct difference. And so whenever your energy prices, your grid, your highway there is outdated, you might not understand it. You just think energy is going to get there. Like you think the lights are going to come on, you think the prices are going to be relatively modest or the increases are going to be with inflation. Like just everything's going to maintain because you're not actually staring at, holy cow, there's a lot of cars on this grid, right? I mean,
that's exactly right.
So it's a out of sight, out of mind, but you can't ignore it.
You cannot. And so into that reality, we suddenly had this data center demand explosion for energy.
And this really, if I'm right, 22 ChatGPT, I think launches and so we have a lot of kind of escalation. I think even before that, we started hearing things like the electrification of cars is going to add about 40% to the grid, and just natural kind of uptick, and maybe Bitcoin mining, things of that nature, cryptocurrency, same thing. So you start having these things and just electrification of the world. But man, 22 ChatGPT changed everything.
22 is the year that changed everything. You're right. So from that point, just the last 3 years, the amount of capital costs that have been put into these data centers has increased 200%. And you just look at at the end of the day, how much is data centers is taking up of our grid in the U.S. So you go back a couple of years and you see that it made up about 4% of all consumption in the U.S. Forecasts now are showing just in the next couple of years, that's going to jump to 12%. So that's a massive.
And we're talking about in the next couple of years, we're talking about in a 5 to 6 year period, something that really wasn't material is now taking 12% of the national energy of the United States.
That's right.
The United States being one of the largest economies in the world, this is not a small number in a very fast period of time. Talking about a 2-lane highway going to 6 lanes, it's like going to 30 lanes.
It is.
On that same 2-lane highway. And so, now we're kind of in a little bit of a pickle.
Yeah, we are. And so then you get to the next leg of the stool, which is just the amount of red tape that our government puts around this. So even if you want to put a new power plant in place, you are going to run into a bureaucratic maze and headwinds that are going to prevent you from doing that quickly. And now, for the past several years, our politicians have been discussing permitting reform and lots of other things to help with this, but that's going to require a bipartisan compromise, and those both sides just don't trust each other right now.
We've not been very bipartisan for a little while in D.C.
Yeah, can't throw that one through reconciliation. So we'll see on that front. So that's been a major headwind to getting things up and running quickly. And so you then just throw in Mother Nature on top of that, which is we've seen bigger storms and wildfires and everything else. It's just been pounding our infrastructure and our grid. And that is why prices have been exploding in the last few years. So that's sort of the why it's happened, kind of almost the look back. But the look forward is almost more concerning.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second because, whenever we talk about AI and data centers, it's there's a lot of energy for it. A lot of Wall Street's excited about it. We've seen returns and the New York Stock Exchange and other exchanges regarding this. There's also some pessimism. Are we at a bubble? What's going on in that regard? But the spending has been full tilt. And sometimes we think job creation, opportunity, growth. This is good. But then when people in these Virginia, or I don't know, there are several states it was kind of isolated to data centers originally. Man, they're taking up space. They're taking up energy grid. They're taking up water. All these things, but they didn't feel in their pocketbooks yet. They just saw like kind of opportunity, kind of good stuff, and now it's like, oh wow, we have to contemplate whenever a data center the size of a Manhattan, literally or figuratively, how much they use, shows up in our rural area that's going to be dependent on our grid, on our source of energy. They're starting to connect those dots, and I think it's an important piece. And by the way, we're not talking about how you power it. Like we don't care. Like this episode is not about what type of power our communities are going to need. It's just we need electrons. We need electrons on the grid. And so when you're saying permitting reform, you're not saying renewable permitting reform, right? You're saying how do we get a nuclear reactor? How do we get geothermal, geoelectric? How do we get more gas, on the line? Solar. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
We're just talking about limited number of electrons and whatever. And we're going to talk about this because looking forward, that's been the question. A lot of folks that are really smart are saying it's like, hey, this isn't about a chip race. This is an electrons race. This is how we sustain is how do we get power on the grid, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it really leads us into this. So, is this the tip of the iceberg? So if you just kind of look, lots of different, independent, credible sources talking about the demand growth and the forecast are worth looking and listening to. And so kind of the first would just be, I referenced it earlier with utilities and what they have to file with the FERC and their estimates. And what you'll see is that what they're estimating the need for energy growth into 2030 has increased significantly, many, many multiples just over the last few years. And why do I really focus on that? It's because if you're going to make an investment, a capital investment to bring on more power to the grid, the traditional ways of doing that takes several years. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. So it really matters that they're now suddenly saying that here by 2030, what they were expecting previously is now completely different. But the tools to actually get that energy between now and 2030 are actually limited. And we'll talk about that here soon. So that's the FERC there.
And stay on utilities.
Yeah.
Because you want to give kind of this broad spectrum, so there's no angle. It's just facts.
Just facts, yeah.
So isn't it Nextera, like the CEO?
Yes.
It's pretty neutral. Like, hey, this is what we're going to need, and this is my fear. Like, talk about a little bit about the CEO and how he approached this challenge he's looking at.
Yeah, that's right. So his view is, I have a certain number of electrons I have to deliver to my customers, and I don't care where that comes from.
Largest utility
in the country. They've got all kinds of sorts. Natural gas plants. They've got renewable plants. They've got kind of all the above. And so for them, we need to be able to access these electrons that we need and not have handcuffs being placed on us.
Okay, and he's seeing a shortfall.
And he's seeing a major shortfall.
Major shortfall. So he's ringing the alarm. Yep. And the cool thing, not the cool thing, but we kind of know the accident is coming. The train's coming, right? And so we can plan for this. And the bells are being rung. And so in this situation, you're saying it takes time, though.
It does.
So how long does it take to get a nuclear site up and running or a new natural gas plant up and running if you wanted to solve it with one of those things through our current permitting scenarios?
Right.
And technology scenarios, right?
Yeah, for all those. So if you think about a nuclear plant, you're talking about a decade, from start to finish from a nuclear plant. And we haven't done one of those in a while. So there's that thing. There's, small modular reactors, some of that new technology that's being looked on, but that's a little early right now to be relying on that to be anytime soon from that end. Natural gas plant, that's several years to get that up and running. There'll probably be some new ones that get added. There's been a lot of push from that, but that's not going to give us everything we need. Whereas you look at renewable energy, solar, wind, things of that nature, that's more of in the months to a year type time frame.
Even a large utility grade field could be 18 months.
It could be, yeah.
Now, that being said, it's got challenges now, right? And again, this isn't a solar conversation, but some things have 5 to 7 years ahead of it, or the technology is not ready. Things like solar now have headwinds because they don't have the incentives. So there's everything right now is kind of put us in a pickle.
It has. And so when you look at, if you were just to step back as a neutral observer and say, all right, we have this shortfall from where we need to get to and to what we've actually been adding to the grid. So let's look at it this way. So OpenAI recently sent a letter to the White House saying a lot of things in it. But one of the things they said was we need 100 gigawatts of new capacity added every year to maintain our leadership in the AI space. Well, it's sobering to realize that last year we actually had 51 gigawatts. That got
We added 51.
We added 51 gigawatts.
So we're already half.
We're half of what we need. We're half of what we need. And so you take half of what we need and realize that what's happened over the past year, what have we been adding recently? So if you look at last year.
What's that 51? Yeah.
If you look at last year, 85% of all additions were solar and storage last year. You add wind to that, it's 94%. 94% renewable. 4% came from natural gas, and 2% came from a smattering of others.
So we're not talking about what's gotten our energy mix overall in the country, but we're talking about literally what we delivered.
We're literally
so that's important from
additions.
a fact perspective. Yes. Over 90% is through renewables, which just got kind of hammered.
Yes. So what happened over the past year? What did our politicians do in the face of this challenge? They made it much harder to add solar and wind projects. So good luck trying to get a permit for a utility-grade solar project on federal land or an offshore wind project. Don't hold your breath.
Yeah, so if we need 100, and 51 is all we added last year, and 51 was 90% renewables, which just got hammered, wow, the shortfall is pretty substantial. And it's like, okay, let's get gas going. Now you're back to the pickle. Even if we wanted to get the gas going, we have all the support in Congress and the president, you have years ahead of you to establish that medium, right?
You do. And, they favor coal as well. But when's the last time we built a coal plant? Like, it's not registering. That's not happening. So it's not even worth our time talking about it. But this is why you need an all of the above strategy.
All right. So you just talked about NextEra and FERC. You talked about OpenAI and the letter they wrote saying, hey, we're short on electrons. And then I know you also wanted to talk about the demand growth from Bloomberg and kind of how
so Bloomberg's a highly reputable source. They came out this week, actually, and they revised their estimate on data center demand growth by 36% from just 7 months ago of what that's going to be. So we're talking about not only this thing exploding, but it continues to be increasing by all the people who are studying it because of just the massive number of additions that are happening and what they're seeing planned over this time period. So this is the reality of what we're facing right now. And also, just kind of going back to that OpenAI letter, it wasn't even just the 100 gigawatts that I think is worth talking about there. They also, frame it in this sense, which is to win this AI race, it's not about microchips anymore. It's about electrons. And, in this is an information age that we're in right now. And just like how the industrial age was won by steel and oil, this information age will be won by electrons. And so it's a national security risk as much as anything else is how they're framing it, which I think is important to realize. So this is important for a number of different reasons.
And I don't know that we're going to end this with a lot of solace or comfort. And we're not trying to create any sort of we're trying to look at facts, look at where things really are, trying to level set. I think it's really important to know where you are because then you can actually make decisions. And those decisions can be trickled down to a homeowner, to a nonprofit, to a business, to a community, to a utility, and then you go all the way up to states and countries, right? You have to make decisions based on facts, and sometimes we get caught up in narratives that we're playing out that are uniquely bent. But you said at the beginning, facts are stubborn things, and the reality is, China's capacity is way greater than ours right now. Their ability to throw on electrons is different than ours, and it's even not compared to China. Fundamentally, we have to attend to this.
We do, and facts are important, but what's more important are the people that are impacted by this. And so, what we're also seeing during this time frame is that a number of folks are being thrown off of their utility because they're falling behind on their payments. They're setting up on a very fixed income schedule, and they're seeing that now they suddenly can't afford to pay for their energy anymore, and that is just a tragedy, and it's happening all across the country.
And that's why it's rising outside of a political spectrum into top ticket items because people literally are getting ousted from their homes and businesses. It's one of their top bills.
It is.
It's a nonprofit. It's one of their top bills, and it's cutting into what they have to do to sustain.
Right. And it's typically been something that they could budget and plan and predict with precision, and they just are not able to anymore because of what's happening. But you think about the family that suddenly doesn't have their energy, and they're losing a lot of things because of what's happening to them. Now they've got to go to the food bank to go make ends meet and to survive and do their thing. Well, at the same time, that food bank is getting hit by the same challenges and the utility prices that are weighing on them, and they're being forced to use more of their funds towards keeping the lights on versus buying those additional meals that are needed. And so it's really all across our communities that are impacted by this.
Yeah, it's a big issue for sure. And I would also say, backing up on this, we're for reform in all of the above. We do want permitting reform.
Yes.
Right? I mean, we want to see more gas plants. We want to see nuclear. We want to see solar. We want to see wind.
We do.
We want to see America and the states we're in have electrons.
Yes.
Like we have no other objective in that. You have to have energy to run a country. If there's a way to do it better, let's do that way.
Yes.
That being said, and it's also, by the way, whose fault is this? How do we get there? It's kind of a collective whole.
It is.
You know, you can't point a finger and say utilities wrong. I mean, I know our utilities in our area are trying to keep up with energy in a lot of different innovative ways, right? They're trying to get their grid. They didn't plan on this. They didn't understand what the ChatGPT would do or how many data centers would come into their markets and they'd have to sustain energy for. So whenever you see a utility increase, it's not like, oh, the utilities just need to stop. Like that's not an answer either. Like they're actually doing what they need to do in order to sustain and give any energy. So it's like, oh man, the price, whose the burden isn't on. It's kind of like our decisions have gotten us here. And now we need to do as smart of things as possible to get us out, which includes a lot of reform and a lot of focus on something that's like food, energy, shelter. These are things we have to do as citizens of any, community to solve.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right. Now, I do want to bring it back down because with all of these things happening, and Trey just said, man, this might just be the tip of the iceberg. Going forward, we're not actually going to be getting out of this pickle. The next 5 years, we've used the word, it's kind of like a tsunami. Mm-hmm. And like we're wet right now. We're frustrated right now, but we don't even see really the size of the wave that's coming. Right. And sometimes tsunamis are coming from far off, and you're just like, oh, that's a nice wave. I could probably ride that one. Then all of a sudden, whoa, this is destructive. And so, yeah, we're in this kind of crisis. It's coming. We can see it several years off. So this is why Brightwell gets excited to do our piece. We can't do everything. It's obviously we care a lot about all types of energies, all of the above, a lot of reform. But in our markets, in our states, in our communities, we are going to be able to provide solutions. Because distributed energy, particularly via solar, can be implemented in 4 to 6 months.
Yes.
And so you have an organization that's sitting here looking at a tsunami saying, what can I do? There's nothing I can do to keep my food bank, my church, the zoo, the history museum rolling. It's glued to this community to do the things we're doing because we don't know what's going to happen. Now you do. Like literally you can take all of that energy, like fear, speculation, what's going to happen, and you can say, I can hedge, I can settle in, I can save, I can know, I can plan. And that all comes inside of distributed energy that actually can get permitted in a small city, that can get permitted in states and get implemented, installed, and power can be produced.
Yeah, that's right. Certainty is so important here. And to your point, when we're talking earlier, we're talking macro trends as it relates to things. But for what Brightwell does in the distributed generation space, we're not impacted nearly as much by those permitting issues that we were referencing earlier. The tax incentive changes, less impactful to us and the way that we're able to work those things. So we're able to make compelling projects work tremendously well over the next 4 years plus.
And we would love to do nothing more. And I've thought about this a lot in my life. Whenever I look at big problems like energy, it's like, man, you kind of get overwhelmed by it. But instead of saying I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to pack up and go home, it's like, let's do what we can do. And when you start thinking smaller into communities, into projects, into particulars, now all of a sudden this food bank can have energy for the next 5 decades without being exposed to the tsunami. Let's do that project.
Right.
This school can now put money back to teachers versus being affected by the tsunami. Let's do that project. This zoo can be a part of this community. And like, if you break it down like that, like it gets way less overwhelming for me. And I think that's why our team gets really excited. That's why organizations that see this, if you're hearing about this for the first time, you're like worried about the tsunami, come in. The water's great actually where we're at because we can actually provide you some level of certainty on majority of buildings in America. And then the cool thing is our investors. Like, okay, so you think sometimes, all right, I get to move my tax dollars into something. I get an agency, great. I get to make a little return, great. I get to make an impact, but I don't think you realize how much you're impacting somebody. Yeah. It's not like, oh, I cut a little bit of bill. I took off 50 years of unpredictability. And to put these organizations in a space, like that's a meaningful impact. It's kind of like do your piece. You can't solve. You can't go to DC necessarily get permanent reform. Still support, vote, help. Do your political thing to support those things, but make a difference now. Like solve someone's future, because it's going to keep happening.
Yeah, and that is why we created Brightwell. It's why we get up every day. It's why we love what we do.
Spot on. And I think every Brightwell member, but our investors, our organizations, our partners, they're all dialed into that mission. If you want to join that, please come on in. It's fun. It makes a difference. We do our piece. The energy landscape is wild right now. I think Trey just did a great job. Thank you, Trey, for kind of walking us through kind of facts.
My pleasure.
And I think it helps most folks. And if you have more questions about these things, obviously talk to us, read our blogs, listen to our podcast. Hopefully we can continue to educate and be a source for reform in the small communities we're in.